everyone. Welcome back to Intentional Youth Ministry. Today, we're going to continue on with the conversation we started last time, which is this: is youth ministry still relevant? Hopefully, you had a chance to watch the last episode. If not, you might want to go back and watch that one first. But we kind of left it off by talking about the weekend experience and how oftentimes we kind of push our students into our main service environments and expect that that is enough for them in their development. Here's what I would encourage you with. We talked about how that, really in that season of their life, there are things that they need to be hearing, being taught in, being coached in, that they're not usually going to get a lot of sometimes in the main environment. So that's one side of it. Another side is the relational component, right? I think we miss the mark hardcore when we start to offer less opportunity for students to engage in relationships with their peers. So whether that's small groups, whether that's various events that you do, retreats, various things like that you do are so important in the development and the discipleship process of your young people. I see oftentimes where churches just start to, hey, less is more, less is more, less is more. And what begins to happen oftentimes is even the churches that are still doing youth ministry, we offer a service and we think that's enough. But can I tell you, I've done a whole episode on this, but what happens Monday through Friday is equally as important. Man, retreats are still valuable. Missions trips are valuable. Conferences and camps are valuable. Trips and hangouts at your house and movie nights and bowling nights and all the fun stuff you do in youth ministry, beach days, those things are still absolutely relevant. Those things are incredible. Small groups, like anything where you're engaging students in relationships is great. And you're just going to have a hard time doing that if you just kind of push them into a main environment all the time. So that's one thing. But then I want to hit another thing with you as far as why I believe that student ministry is still very much relevant in our culture and to the church. And that is simply this. I read a book a few years ago, and it was just brilliant. And it was from, I will say this, disclaimer, it was from a secular perspective. There were some doctors, psychiatrists, scientists who did all this research, and they wrote a book on it, put it all together, and compiled it. And it was very interesting because it was basically talking about adolescence and the developmental process that young people go through. Now, I'll tell you, for years, if you've been doing youth ministry, you've probably said things like this before, especially when you're like in your lead pastor's office trying to convince him of why you need more budget or more money, things like that. But hey, youth ministry is like the most important time in a student's life, in a person's life, right? You've probably said that, as have I. But for years I said that and I believed it to be true, but I didn't really have any data, empirical data or context or whatever you want to call it to actually prove that point. And so in that, this book and this research and studies they did was kind of mind-blowing because basically they came to the same conclusion, but from a completely scientific and psychiatric kind of standpoint. So they studied the adolescent mind, and this is really interesting what they found. And they say this, that in the lifespan of humans, that our minds are the most plastic kind of in that 11, 12-year-old. Now it's kind of up into your early-ish 20s, okay? And they say, so basically adolescence. They say that our minds in that season of our life are the most plastic. But don't think about plastic in the sense of like a hard plastic. Think about plastic while it's still in the process of being molded, right? So it's got that fluidity, flexibility, and until it's finally in its final mold and hardened, right? So think about plastic while it's still in a moldable form. So they basically compared the adolescent mind to that plastic that's still being molded. And they said what happens is the older we get, the harder that plastic becomes, right? So in other words, the less flexible, the less moldable it becomes. And so what they were basically saying is, again, completely not even from a Christian perspective, but they were saying the importance of what a young person experiences, what they are fed, what they see, what they experience in that season of their life is literally shaping and molding who they will become as an adult. Right? If you're with me, this is so incredibly, it's huge when it comes to youth ministry and what you guys are all doing to invest in young people, which says to me that we need to be that much more intentional about how we're developing young people. In fact, they do a thing, there's this thing they discovered in this process. It's called the Reminiscence Bump. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, and honestly, if you're one of my younger audience watching this, maybe this won't ring true for you just yet. But for any of you guys who are probably up in your mid-30s or older, maybe this will relate to you. And they call it the Reminiscent Bump. So think about your life for just a moment. And if you're like most people in my age group or even older than me, if you think about your life like middle school, pre-adolescent, so elementary school aged kind of time, most of us can remember very few things, very significant things. If there was something super impactful, positive or negative, we kind of remember the highlights, if you will, from that time frame. Now skip ahead, and if you're like most adults, think about the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years of your life, depending on how old you are. Same thing, right? Like for me now, man, I remember my kids being born. I remember getting married. I remember really impactful moments. But guys, I can't tell you some of the details of things that happened last week. You know what I'm saying? And so I can't. That's just the way that our minds work. But now, if I think back to like middle school, like 12, 13, into my early 20s, guys, throughout high school, I can tell you in vivid detail random things that I did, that I experienced, that I was a part of, that really had no even significant impact on my life. But I remember them in detail from that time frame of my life. Guys, this is what scientists call the reminiscent bump. And it just goes again to show you that what students and young people and adolescents, what they're being exposed to, what they're experiencing in that time frame of their life, guys, is literally shaping who they will become in adulthood. So back to the question, is youth ministry still relevant? I 1000% believe that it is, for those very reasons that I just laid out to you guys. Like that, because of developmentally where young people are, it is so important that we are focusing and intentional as the church to develop our young people. And guys, again, I promise you, it doesn't matter how awesome your lead pastor is or how great of a communicator he is, he's not intentionally building the programming and things in their main services for your young people. And so I think absolutely we need to continue to not shrink back, not do less when it comes to student ministry, but how can we invest more? How can we reach more? How can we empower more? How can we create programming and systems and structures that will help us intentionally disciple the young people that God has entrusted us with? Hope that encourages you guys. God bless, and we'll see you next time.